Am I online? Okay, it looks like I'm online. So here is my Changeling post show for you. I'll be online for the next, I don't know, hour or so talking about the Changeling. Now I'm online on Instagram as well. Alright, so we just watched the Changeling on either Shutter or I watched the Blu-ray. Let me get my case. So I watched the Changeling on Blu-ray. This is the Severin Films release from 2017. And so this was my third time seeing the Changeling, and I admit that I kind of understand why people love this film so much, even though it's not personally one of my favorite horror films, even though it does get the like haunted house atmosphere, right? So I think I'm going to start off by reading this little review from Weird Sex in Snowshoes by Catherine Monk. So there's a review of the Changeling here, so I will just read it. So, when I saw this movie for the first time, I was 14 years old, and it was the scariest thing I had ever seen. After the Brady Bunch Halloween special, the film opens with an idyllic shot of beautiful snowy mountains, which is supposed to be in the States, but is actually on Vancouver's North Shore, and a happy family outing. Seconds later, tragedy strikes. John Russell, George C. Scott, watches as his wife and daughter are killed by a runaway truck. Months later, he takes a teaching job on the West Coast to leave the ghosts behind, but finds himself haunted anew when he moves into an old mansion with bad plumbing. He hears banging at certain hours of the day, and it's getting louder. Inevitably, he climbs into the furthest recesses of his attic with little more than a flashlight and discovers horrific truth. Full of thrills, chills, and solid performances from its veteran cast, the movie manages to conjure an incredible amount of suspense with little more than $2 props. A veritable how-to book on how to shoot and edit a scary movie without numbing your audience with quick cuts. And it has a Canadian checklist here. Dislocated father figure, dead children, internalized demons, and identity issues. So I guess that's what makes The Changeling a Canadian film in the eyes of Catherine Monk of Weird Sex and Snowshoes. And I'm going to maintain this stream for about another 40 minutes or so and talk more about Changeling. So I just want to emphasize that I'm not talking about 2008's Changeling, which is directed by Clint Eastwood and stars Angelina Jolie. That's a totally different movie altogether. And it is interesting that Changeling actually swept the Genie Awards when it came out. It won the Genie Award for Best Canadian Film and also won Best Foreign Actor for George C. Scott, Best Foreign Actress for Trish and Devery, Best Adapted Screenplay for William Gray and Deanna Maddox, Best Art Design, Trevor Williams, Best Cinematography for John Coquilin, Best Sound for Joe Grimaldi, Austin Grimaldi, Dino Pigat, and Carl Shear, and Best Sound Editing by Patrick Drummond, Dennis Drummond, and Robert Grieve. And the film is number 54 on Bravo's 100 Scariest Movie Moments. And director Martin Scorsese placed The Changeling on his list for the 11th scariest horror films of all time. One thing is, I don't really find the Changeling all that scary. Well, it has scary moments, but I don't know. It's maybe it's because I'm desensitized to horror and something that'll be very scary to an average Joe would not be that scary to me. So it's actually a very big accomplishment for a horror film if I'm actually truly scared by it because I see so many horror films that I know all the tricks. So, but I don't think the Changeling actually. I think the Changeling actually created some of the tricks actually. So uh, the film has the seance scene, which is the I think the first really major horror set piece in the film. And one thing that I noticed on this third viewing of the Changeling is that seance scene is very similar to the seance scene that appears in James Wan's Insidious, which is actually celebrating its 10th anniversary this year. I can't believe it. And but I think it probably set the stage for seance scenes to come. But I don't really think I prefer the post seance scene where you have George C. Scott listening back to the reel to reel and hearing the EVP of the Ghost Boy's voice because that's kind of scary. But like the seance itself is just well, it gets intense, and then there's the wheelchair. So I think some have quoted like the wheelchair moving on its own to be like a big scary moment of the film, and that's definitely big part of the climax of the Changeling, definitely. And let's do some IMDb trivia. I heard that there were Changeling was apparently based on a real story. That's a first for me. And okay, so screenwriters Diane Maddox and William Gray spent around 6 months doing research for the film, which included copious newspaper articles on parapsychological encounters, over 700 books, and almost 200 case histories. So, the movie is based on events which supposedly took place at Henry Treat Rogers Mansion in Denver, Colorado, whilst writer Russell Hunter was living there during the 1960s. The Cheesman Park neighborhood in the movie is a reference to Cheesman Park in Denver, where the original haunting transpired. First of two ghost horror movies that veteran actor Melvin Douglas made in a 2-year period, right at the end of his film career. The other picture was Ghost Story in 1981, his final film credit. Actors Trish Van Devere and George C. Scott were married. Publicity for this film stated that they made 7 films together in their 8 years of marriage, and this movie being their 8th. Director Peter Maddock said he initially was intimidated by stories of George C. Scott being difficult to work with. The only trouble Maddock had with Scott on the set was when production managers accidentally knocked over a chessboard on which Scott had been playing a game against himself for over 2 weeks. Spanish filmmaker Alejandro Amenabar has claimed in several interviews that this was one of his all-time horror films, up to the point of inspiring several scenes in Tessis and The Others. And The Others is definitely one of my favorite haunted house films, and I have it on Blu-ray, and I should rewatch it sometime. And okay, so moving on, the movie was the first film to win Best Picture at the Genie Awards. I mentioned that. So the film was filmed in 1978, but not released until 1980. Although Rick Rotens is credited as the film composer, the music box composition is actually written by Harold Blake. The unabridged composition is featured in his Life Psycho collection of 24 piano works in 24 keys. George C. Scott learned to play the pieces of classical music that he plays on the piano for the college students. Here's an interesting bit of trivia. Changeling apparently has the first on-screen appearance of actor Joshua Jackson when he was just several months old. And here's the next. Before Peter Minnick was given a job, two British directors were considered. Tony Richardson declined due to creative differences. Though predominantly filmed in Canada, the picture was set in Seattle, where established construction film. These include the Rainer Tower, the SeaTac Airport, the University of Washington's Red Square. So some location filming was done in New York, and most of the movie was filmed in Vancouver and British Columbia, and some interiors were shot at Toronto. Don was initially slated to direct this film, but eventually left due to creative differences with the producers. The same year, co-star Trish Van Devere was the main star in another haunted house movie, The Hearse. The name of the history group was the Seattle Historical Preservation Society. The name of the campus where Dr. John Russo taught music was the University of Seattle. All the interiors were shot at the University of Toronto. Tony Richardson was considered to direct this film. A finger thumb was used as the sound effect of the ball rolling down the stairs. Here's some interesting trailer. So the meaning of the movie's Changeling title is defined as being a creature found in European folklore and folk religion. It is typically described as being the offspring of a fairy, troll, elf, or other legendary creature that has secretly left in the place of a human child. Sometimes the term is also used to refer to the child who was taken. It is the swap child meaning of the film that is of relevance to this film's story. So that's it for the IMDb trivia. So Wikipedia and the film. So the film screenplay was inspired by the mysterious events that literally took place at the Henry Treat Rogers Mansion. We already ended that. So Russell Hunter found a century-old journal in a hidden room detailing the life of a disabled boy who was kept in isolation by his parents during a seance. He claimed the spirit of the deceased boy directed him to another house where he discovered human remains and a gold medallion bearing the dead boy's name. Henry Treat Rogers, a wealthy Denver attorney, was childless, but the prior inhabitants of the house remain undocumented. The mansion was demolished during the 1980s and replaced with a high-rise apartment building. Okay, so we're going to talk about the tax shelter area, which the Changeling was made during, and I'm going to read a paragraph from Canadian National Cinema by Christopher E. Gittings. So here we go. The tax shelter boom and Canada's Hollywood features. The Tompkins Report of 1976 emphasized the commercial Hollywood aspect of the feature film industry as an export industry. The report, therefore, pushes the Canadian industry towards making Hollywood-style films with a mass audience appeal beyond the boundaries of any one country, films which subsequently return a gross revenue well above the production costs. Films such as Jaws is a classic example of this trend, as quoted in Magder 1993. As Magder notes, this attitude is a throwback to Grierson's "If you can't beat 'em, join 'em" ethos regarding Hollywood feature films. The Tompkins Report recommendations sacrifice cultural specificity of a Canadian national cinema for generic North American, read Hollywood, projects to secure wide distribution and exhibition through U.S. owned companies. The late 1970s increase in feature production due to tax shelter legislation developed under the assumption that Canada would become a Hollywood North, producing features that could turn a profit in the United States, producing films for American audiences. The emphasis on the American market, of course, favored the production of English language films as good risks for CFDC investment. Among the films produced during this period are Meatballs, directed by Ivan Reitman, distributed in the US and Canada by Paramount and grossing $40 million in 1979. Murder by Decree, directed by Bob Clark, and The Changeling, which we just watched, distributed by 20th Century Fox. Porky's, also by Bob Clark, is the most successful of all tax shelter films, grossing $11 million in Canada and $152 million worldwide in 1982. Around this time, the CFTC backed away from its nationalist remit to represent Canada to Canadians. As Michael McCabe, chief executive officer of the CFTC, stated in a 1980 interview, too often we hid behind our nationalism to protect mediocrity. And I'll probably just end it there. So that's the tax shelter era in a nutshell, which caused a film such as The Changeling to be made as a Canadian film, but not really. So this is the part of National Canadian Film Day, and we're, I think, for all intents and purposes, The Changeling is considered to be a Canadian film. However, it's a Canadian film with a but, because the film stars George C. Scott. It takes place in Seattle. It is not that Canadian, but it's considered the Canadian horror film, and the semantics can be definitely confusing when it comes to Canadian cinema. So I think that's why a day such as National Canadian Film Day is a good thing, because it allows us to debate what exactly a Canadian film is. And Changeling is, for all intents and purposes, Canadian, and we'll celebrate it as such because it was made in Vancouver. I think it had Canadian crew, and it won a lot of Genie Awards, so I guess that counts. Like, really, it won Best Picture at the Genie Awards. That's unbelievable. I think it beat Silence of the Lambs by about a decade, winning the Best Picture at the Oscars. So you don't really see many genre films get big award recognition like this. So I guess that's a big deal for Changeling being not only a Canadian horror film, but an award-winning Canadian horror film. And then there's the whole tax shelter thing. I think the tax shelter actually made David Cronenberg's career pretty much. A lot of his early films were made with tax shelters, so like The Brood and I think Rabid. So I was trying to look up an old Toronto film scene article I had written about the Changeling, but sadly, Toronto film scene is no longer online, and I can't really find the article I wrote, which was actually debating whether the Changeling is considered essential Canadian cinema, and I probably have it in my archive somewhere. Just I need to dig around. Maybe I have old emails and stuff. So instead, I'll go look up my old letterbox review for the Changeling, and here's my. So I first saw the Changeling at a screening at the Bell Lightbox on October 31st, 2013. It was a Halloween screening. The screening was at 11 at night, and it kind of contributed to my feelings on the film. So here is my letterbox review from The Changeling from October 31st, 2013. I am going to partially blame my response on the fact that it was a late night screening and I was dozing off at points. However, this was definitely not one of the greatest cinematic ghost stories as everyone was claiming it to be. The film definitely had the right atmosphere. However, the plot of the film moved at a very slow pace and there were very long stretches when nothing happened. Also, the haunting seemed more like a plot device than something that was truly meant to be scary. In fact, it was not until the final 10 minutes when the film became something remotely close to the film I was expecting. That said, I'm perfectly willing to rewatch the film, perhaps at an hour when I was more likely to stay awake. Now, that was my first viewing of the film, so I then rewatched the film for the aforementioned Toronto Film Scene article about a year later, and so I'm a bit more positive for my second viewing in October of 2014, and so pretty much I just said, being fully awake for my second viewing of the film, I was able to catch some elements of the plot that I missed last time. However, despite having the right atmosphere, I still believe the film's reputation of one of the scariest films ever made is a bit on the exaggerated side. Now, has my opinion of the film changed with this third building? I would say, yeah, I can see why people like this, and I notice new things each time. I think one thing I noticed this time is that at one point after the seance, there's like this flashback to the murder. And if you think about it, it's a very disturbing scene because they're showing a murder of a young child in a film. And like, that's not something you really see in too many films, even horror films. Like, killing kids and killing dogs, those are the two most taboo things in film, and you do not get to see those that often. And yeah, okay, so I'm gonna probably wrap this up now. I'm getting tired. I'm gonna finish my beer, and that's it for National Canadian Film Day.